Many years ago, I got friendly with some Bedouins near the St. Catherine Monastery in the Sinai, in Egypt. Those Bedouin, during the Israeli occupation, had lived well. They'd rented out their camels to tourists and they'd given them a taste of desert life. But then the Sinai was returned to Egypt in 1982, and Egyptians from the Delta came down and pushed the Bedouin aside. One old Bedouin complained bitterly about this, and he said, وَهُمَّ مِشْ عَرَب هُمَّ فَلَحِينَ. These people are not even Arab, they're peasants. I was too young to realize what an interesting moment that was. To him, to the old Bedouin, the Egyptians were not real Arabs. Arab in his world meant Bedouin, and that was once the common view. A view now, I guess, almost extinct. So who is Arab? I'm going to talk about the idea and the feeling that those who speak Arabic in the Middle East are all Arabs, that they belong to the same nation and that they share a common destiny. Christian merchants in Beirut, Muslim peasants in Egypt and Palestine, Druze mountain clans, Bedouin nomads, many others. We all have a notion of the Arab world, from Western Africa to Iran. But this is a new concept, launched less than 2 centuries ago by some remarkable people in Lebanon. I can hear some of you thinking, we know about the Arabs already. They conquered the world, most of the world, long ago. Arab identity is not new, it's old. Yes, the Arabs from Arabia were Arabs, but their cause was not Arabism, it was Islam. They built an Islamic empire, which was run by Arabs for a while, and then it broke up into Mamluk, Berber, Persian, Turkish, and other parts and fragments. The Arabs spread Islam, and they spread their language and outlook to Aramaic-speaking Palestinian peasants, Christians and Jews, to Coptic-speaking Egyptian peasants, and many others. But in that medieval world, with more and more people speaking Arabic, there was still no Arabism. There were plenty of identities, clan, sect, tribe, but above them was one universal identity, Islam. Non-Muslims had their place, but their place was defined by Islam. To be an Arab in that world was a mark of distinction. Locals under Islam often invented Arab ancestry. But when a Palestinian or a Moroccan dignitary invented an Arabian pedigree, that was not an early example of Arabism. It was the opposite. It was snobbery. It wasn't saying, we're all Arabs, so let's stick together. It was saying, we here are the real Arabs, unlike the rest of you. An Arabic-speaking Christian in Damascus in 1800, he wouldn't dream of calling himself Arab. A Bedouin from the desert, who did call himself Arab, wouldn't dream of calling townspeople Arab just because they spoke Arabic. The term Arab still referred to personal lineage. So Pan-Arabism, when it began, was a conceptual revolution. It had a modern message. Arabhood was not an identity of blood, but of culture. People who'd never regarded themselves as Arabs began to do so. How did that happen? Here are the famous first lines of the beautiful book about all this, The Arab Awakening by George Antonius. The story of the Arab national movement opens in Syria in 1847 with a foundation in Beirut of a modest literary society under American patronage. One's first reaction to this is, what? How could anything as important as Pan-Arabism begin in such an obscure way? But that's what happened. It's a great example of the power of ideas in the material world. The task of the first Pan-Arab pioneers was daunting. A British expert sent to the area in 1838 reported that there were no bookshops in all of Syria, no newspapers, there were no secular books, no printing press with Arabic type until the American missionary Eli Smith brought one. There were no schools for girls until Smith's wife started one. The American Protestants and the French Jesuits who started the Qawmiya, the Arab awakening, had two remarkable partners, Nassif Yaziji and Butrus Bustani, the key figures in what is called the Nahda, the cultural renaissance. No, that's Smith and his wife. I'm very sorry. This is the missionary Smith and his wife. We've talked about them, all right? So here come the Nahda pioneers. Yaziji was a Greek Catholic from a village in Mount Lebanon. He was a brilliant boy, hungry for learning, but there were no books. So he knocked at the doors of monasteries and asked to see their old manuscripts. He found there the treasures of classical Arabic literature, and he made it his mission to resurrect that heritage. He wrote dictionaries, grammars, and founded schools. The other great figure in the revival movement was Butrus Bustani, also a Christian from the mountains. When he was 10, he'd been taught Latin and Aramaic by monks. When Eli Smith, the missionary, asked Bustani to translate the Bible into Arabic, he prepared himself by learning Hebrew and then Greek. The dream of these guys and their associates was to give the peoples of the region something valuable to keep them together so that they wouldn't let themselves be played off against each other by the Ottomans. Those were violent times. Thousands of Christians were massacred in 1860. That became a major international crisis. But the educators didn't lose faith. Knowledge, Bustani wrote in his weekly, will kill fanaticism and breed tolerance. Enlightenment. When Muslim, Druze, and Christian pupils studied together, they would become united in patriotism. The first pan-Arab movements and clubs, they couldn't be called Arab or national. That would have alerted the Turks, the Ottomans. They were called art clubs, reading circles, friends of science. Branches sprung up all over from Baghdad to Jerusalem. Druze and Muslim sheikhs gave them protection so that Arabism began to look less and less like a foreign Christian idea. So for the first time since the Ottoman conquest, a common ideal was bringing creeds and groups together. Arab national consciousness began to grow. Many years later, Lawrence of Arabia, the most famous European pan-Arabist, would say that the American schools in the Levant had brought revolution without intending to. In the 1870s, after decades of education and revival, Arabism turned political. Students at the American University of Beirut formed a secret society. They painted slogans on walls calling on people to rise against the misrule of the Ottomans. Arabism became less and less of an elite idea. In May 1919, the Christian Muslim Association of Palestine held an assembly at a cinema in Jaffa. More than 500 people showed up. The speakers praised the British who'd brought freedom. Then they voted on a resolution. Muslims and Christians declare themselves united in the belief in a new homeland, Al-Arabiya, Arabia, with equal rights for all, led by Faisal the Hashemite prince. Faisal, as you know, was the partner of Lawrence during the guerrilla war against the Ottomans. At that time, 1919, Faisal was still in power in Damascus. After 400 years of Turkish rule, Palestinian villagers saw their future ideal as being led by a Bedouin prince they'd never seen. That says something of the appeal of Arabism already then. Faisal at the time was in Damascus because the British had promised him Syria. They had also promised it to the French. A year later, in the Battle of Maysalun, when Faisal and his Arabs were kicked out of Syria by French colonial troops, that was a terrible blow to Arabism. Lawrence lobbied in Britain for Britain to atone for this betrayal of the Arabs. And as you know, two new kingdoms were invented, Iraq for Faisal and Transjordan for his brother Abdallah. So the debt to the Hashemite family was somewhat settled, but the dream of a united Arab nation crashed. Later, when Arab countries failed in the 1948 war against Israel, it left a huge pan-Arab trauma. The Egyptian leader, Abdul Nasser, who'd fought as a young officer in 1948, became the hope of the whole Arab world when he promised to wash away the shame. Pan-Arabism became alive again. But then there was another trauma. Israel defeated the Arab armies in 1967 and occupied all of Palestine. Pan-Arabism had failed again. It had failed and it had not. It had failed as a solution, but it had succeeded as an identity. 1948 and 67 were traumatic for the whole region because people now felt like Arabs. It was their humiliation, even if they lived 1,000 miles away. Even if they'd never met Palestinians, they experienced their tragedy in a personal way, which remains true to this day, of course. Pan-Arabism was a modern idea. It came with dreams of prosperity and freedom, good things, which rarely happened in the new Arab states. The disappointments piled up, and in the 1980s, Arabism was challenged by a rival vision, Islamism, with Muslim fellowship as the primary identity. Islamism changed the region, but it didn't deliver. The Arab countries that first sponsored Islamism, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the Emirates, and paid for the Islamization of Gaza and the West Bank, they now fear and fight it and embrace Arabism once again. There have been other challenges during the years to Pan-Arabism. Phoenicianism in Lebanon, Pharaohism in Egypt, Canaanism in Palestine, Babylonianism under Saddam in Iraq, attempts at separate identities. But those are all curiosities by now. There will not be a united Pan-Arab nation, but Arab identity, which was once a dream, is now the reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Very interesting. Is this to say that Pan-Arabism as a policy or an ideology, political ideology, is a spent force?
In the sense that its primary goal is out of reach, a united Arabia, but it still plays a role. For instance, at this moment, or until recently, Saudi Arabia wanted very much to establish relations with Israel. But it didn't dare to. Or it didn't dare to unless Israel accepted some kind of attempts at a Palestinian solution. So there are things you cannot do because of Pan-Arabism. There are limits, like this one for in recent. I would say that the Palestinian issue and the identification of all Arabs with Palestinians is perhaps the strongest part, the most concrete surviving part of political Arabism. Mm-hmm. That's still a factor.
So this expression, the Arab street, that one often hears, is that sort of an expression of Pan-Arabism?
Yeah, in the sense that very often, in modern times, the Arab street, public opinion, from Morocco to Iraq, has been pretty unanimous, especially when Israel and the Palestinians clash.
All right, thank you very much.